A pleasant day to everyone. We are Group 13. I am Miss Villasin. We have Mr. Carnio and Mr. Batty in our group. Today we will present the EU Self-Absorption Scale Test Manual. So, to begin, we will not discuss the introduction. Cal, can you tell us more about it?
Thank you for that, Ms. Villasin. The EU self-absorption test was created in order to determine the reasons behind an individual's self-absorbed behavior. We believe that there is a fine line between consumed by oneself and prioritizing oneself. The former consists of selfish action that may result in trampling on other emotions and gaining control over anything, while the latter promotes growth and appreciation not only for oneself but also for the others in the natural environment. In addition, there is a contemporary tendency that the younger generations have a strong sense of self-esteem and think that their emotions, needs, and rights are more important than those of other people's generations. Next slide, please. Here are the model of the self-absorption scale. I would like to call Ms. Villasin to present this model.
So, as you can see, this is it looks like a target. So, you see, it is because the goal is to find out why someone is self-absorbed in their thoughts and behaviors. So, self-centeredness is, of course, has numerous causes, but this test concentrates on the three subtypes of it, which is the needs and feelings and rights. Some people have a tendency to be self-absorbed because of their needs, and others have a tendency to be so because of their feelings and maybe because of their rights. So our point is, um, the point of the test, the point of the test is to determine which of this facet might be a contributor on their centeredness or self-absorption um, tendency of an individual. So moving on, we will now talk about what does the EU self-absorption scale test measures. Trisha, can you tell us more about it?
Okay, so let's now move on to self-absorption scale test measures. So the AU self-absorption scale test intends to measure people's self-absorption in general with no definite age. So this test contains 60 statements divided into needs, feelings, and rights. The scale ranges from 1, which corresponds to not like me at all, as the lowest, to 4 as the highest.
So moving on, we will not talk about the development of EU or the self-absorption scale test. Of course, we didn't just like create it right away like a finished product. Of course, there's a process that must be done in order to make it complete. So um in here we have phase one, the first stage that we go through, which is the brainstorming and concept creation. Of course, in this place, our group have a discussion and exchange of ideas of what could be the potential objective of the assessment tool that we will make. So alongside with it, we talk about the objectives and the purpose of the study that we will tackle throughout the sessions. And of course, um, because of this, we have to um, carefully pick which one is the best among the proposals that we've exchanged with each other and propose it to our facilitator or instructor of our core subject. So the next phase, after identifying our objective of the assessment tool and having it um, proposed to our um, instructor and having it um, accepted, we will now move to phase two. The phase two is the building of the body. So, by this, it means that we now must identify the facets of the assessment tool, which is the self absorption. So, we have to identify what are the facets that could be linked to it. So, of course, after discussions and brainstorming and various of exchange of thoughts and studies, uh, we categorized self-absorption or self-centeredness into three subcategories or subtypes, which is needs, feelings, and rights. I repeat, the point of the test is to identify why a person is self-absorbed. These subtypes are just the factors that could attribute or influence why such person um, shows self-absorbed, why a person shows self-centeredness. So after this, identifying the facets, we now must generate an overall a minimum of 100 um, indicators or items. Of course, this is not the final phase. This is just a draft of what is the potential content of the assessment tool. So as you can see, this is the facet, needs, feelings, and rights, and these are the definitions to give a more structured of what is needs and what is feelings and rights in the context of EU's self-absorption scale test. Moving on, we now going to enter the phase three, which is the pilot testing and validation. As I mentioned earlier, we generated at least minimum of 100 items. Me and my group mates successfully made 120 um, test items, but these items are not verified. So we have to look for three validators to verify our item content and see if they are good indicators for our facets. So after a few weeks, we found validators and we receive the validation sheets. We come up and with 60 items and we we will now create an online questionnaire for our assessment tool. Why? Because right now we are facing a pandemic, so a pen and paper might not be safe for us and for our participants to be executed. So the pilot testing is done through online using the Google Form platform. Through it, we generated no we are able to obtain 120 participants, and using the gathered data, we can now move on to phase four, which is the evaluation analysis. So you might ask, what is the point of pilot testing? Well, this is for norming and also to check the validity and the reliability of the test or assessment tool, if it's a good if this is a good assessment tool in evaluating or measuring, no, not evaluating but measuring self absorption. Now moving on, we will now talk about applications and administration. So what is the use of self-absorption test or EU? Well, first we have identification and assessment. This could be used by professionals in identifying and assessing an individual who might be potentially showing signs of self-absorption, or just generally wanted to have an assessment regarding their state of self-absorption level. In this way, the professionals could have a helping tool in identifying what could be the factors and what could be the reason why a person is self-centered. So, as I mentioned, professionals could use it in counseling or in evaluation, but this is not just limited in the psychological field. This could also be used in research and studies. In this way, we provide an assessment tool that could be used in measuring specifically self-absorption level of an individual that might be needed to conduct their research and studies. So moving on, what does the participants has to know? Well, Of course, the participants must know the terms and conditions before taking the exam or the test, I mean. Um, they have the right to be informed. The participants must be aware of what is being measured and where is it going to be used and why is it being measured. So, um, additionally, since they are informed, of course, they have the right to ask if ever there are clarifications that needed or any questions related to the exam or the test, I mean, sorry. Moving on. So, if ever the participants thought that it is something that they don't want to partake in, they have the right to withdraw, whether it's in the middle of answering the test or in just in the beginning, or maybe if they are almost done. They have the right to withdraw and request to delete their data from the database. Moving on, uh, in regards to um, looking for participants, it must be voluntary. There must be no force, partake, or present as in conducting the assessment. Lastly, true and honest per- means the participants must swear that their answers are authentic and true to themselves. For it greatly affects the score of the participants, and of course, obviously this would have a huge impact on the results. And if they answered based on social desi- desirability, this could potentially have a false report or first false evaluation that could not only affect their result, but also the findings of the research or studies that will use their data. Moving on, as I mentioned before, I keep mentioning the data recording and the usage. So, of course, this leans more on the facilitators of the assessment tool or anyone who will use the assessment tool. Um, Regarding the usage and recording, they must always practice confidentiality and all, only use the data solely on the purpose of what is stated in the terms and condition. Now, moving on, we shall now talk about the scale description of the EU test. I'm calling Arcania or Miss Trisha to tell us more about it. Trisha?
Thank you, Jade. So now let's move on to scale description. So this chapter presents information on each of the facet of the AU self-absorption scale test. So for each scale, information is presented about how to interpret high, medium, and low scores. So the interpretations of scores were merely based on the mean score of each facet. The range for each interpretation of score were presented in the interpreting scores section in the manual. Next, please. In facet one, which is the needs, respondents who achieved high scores are extremely competitive. So they always brag about their accomplishments. They are always certain that they are better than others. They are so preoccupied with their own world and self image that it is nearly hard for others to meet their expectations. On the other hand, moderate scorers are sometimes competitive, although there are times that they doubt their own abilities. They know when to feel confident and when to keep it low. They are aware that they got possessions more than others, but they doesn't flaunt it all the time. While low scorers seldomly compete with others, resulting to a low profile as being described, they are unsure of what skills they have got and sometimes they lack confidence and spirit to execute something primarily. They also never boast for what they have in life and would not request you a favor multiple times even if you didn't comply. Now we come to the second facet, which is the feelings. Respondents who achieved high score in this facet are very unsympathetic. They are also unable to understand things from another's point of view, and they are unconcerned about others, while moderate scorers prioritize themselves first, but not all the time. They have their own set of standards when to recognize the feelings of others. Although they got a hard time seeing the point of view of others, they still tend to show some sympathy on some occasions. Low scorers always put themselves last of the list. They tend to understand everyone in their own motives of doing things. That is why people within this score range were sometimes used by other people for personal gains. They are also timid and have nothing to boast of. Finally, yet importantly, the last facet, which is the rights. High scorers are extremely self opinionated. They like having authority over people. Their sense of self importance is also heightened. They consider themselves to be more competent, smarter, and better, and so more deserving of certain life achievements. Meanwhile, people having moderate scores are those who know when to put themselves in the middle. They balance their rights just when to get their privilege and when to give it off. Then, low scorers were the opposite of those high scorers. They have a low demand for what should be their rights. They accept almost anything that is given to them, even if they think they don't deserve it. They do this passively as trying to avoid conflicts with others people's preference. That's all for chapter 3. Kyle?
Chapter 4: Reliability and Validity. This implies consistency, and validity refers to the capacity of the test or the instrument to be reliable to measure what is intended to measure. Next slide, please. For the internal consistency reliability, we use the Cronbach's coefficient alpha. The findings in this table reveals an adequate amount of dependability, which is a precondition for a high degree of reliability. There was a difference in how each aspect was understood, with a higher reliability for the needs facets, uncertain reliability for the feelings component, and unacceptable facet for the rights component. Most of these features may be relied upon the accurate measurements of the reasons behind the person's tendency to be absolved in general. In short, you could see that these tests can be categorized as unacceptable and reliable for its consistency. Next slide, please. After that, we use the split half correlation method and the Spearman-Brown coefficient. The split half correlation method was developed using a total of 20 statements from each aspect. The data in the table, as you can see, demonstrates outstanding dependability, which again is necessary for the test to be reliable. The split half and the Spearman-Brown value indicates that the reliabilities of each aspect may vary between 0.70 and 0.81 with a mean coefficient of 0.76. One component, the needs, stayed constant when compared to Cronbach's alpha coefficient. However, the other two, feelings and rights, rose in dependability when compared to the Spearman-Brown coefficient. Nonetheless, all the aspects are actually dependable and within the predicted ranges, demonstrating the test correctness for which a person might become self-absorbed. Next, please. We correlated the each facets have having their intercorrelation and interdependency to each other, with the feelings and the needs having the lowest intercorrelated to correlation as to each other, and while the rights and the needs have the most value in intercorrelationness, which means that there is a subtle amount of correlation between the facets demonstrated. Next slide, please. Uh, Demographics. approximately 120 people were made as samples, and this shows the demographics of those samples. As you can see in the table, civil status are having the most value that can correlated with these scales that we are measuring. We can conclude that people who are having social relationship with others are more eager to do self-absorbed things, whether it is for themselves or for the others, followed by the sexual orientation and the gender, having the age list of the values. Next slide, please. Norming the test. In this norming the test, we are having representative of our samples. Variables such as gender, age, and sexual orientation and civil status are included in the data that has been collected. In this presentation, in this graph, the average respondent was 24 years old with a standard deviation of 39.9%. The respondents are divided into four groups: 13 to 19 years old, 20 to 29 years old, 30 to 39 years old, and 40 years old and older, with the option of prefer not to say. With the 93 respondents, the representative sample is dominated by those between the ages of 20 and 29 years old. Following that was the age category of 13 to 19 years old, which included 25 contestants. Finally, there is only one respondent per each category for those between the ages 30 and 39 and for those age 40 and up. Next slide, please. On the next graph, we could show, proceed to the next slide. On the next table, you could see the sexual orientation and their number of participants. According to the recorded data, the majority of the representative sample, which consisted of a small number of 87 individuals, identified themselves as heterosexual. Following that, there were 22 people who identified as being on the LGBTQ plus spectrum. To be more explicit, 14 participants identified as bisexual, 16 participants identified as pansexual, 1 participant identified as gay, 1 participant identified as asexual, and 1 participant identified as demisexual pansexual. Finally, 10 people stated that they did not want their sexual orientation revealed. Next slide, please. In accordance to the data, a manageable amount of 92 individuals identified themselves as single. There are 27 participants who are in a relationship with one another. Finally, there is one person who is married. And that concludes the norms between our test.
Thank you so much for listening. I am Jaden Isabel Villasin,
And I am Kyle Simon Bati.
I am Trisha Arcaño.
and we are the Group 13. Thank you for listening once again. Have a great day.
Thank you.